Every year is always a wild one, but 2017 is still fresh in everyone's minds, so it must be a good time to make a video about it, right? Not like I'm way overdue for one or anything. In the real world, 2017 brought us an onslaught of awful news headlines and presidential tweets that sounded like they belonged to a parody account. No wonder we all want to escape these headlines and retreat to virtual worlds. In contrast, we saw much more encouraging news for our devices that allow us to escape to these virtual vistas, except this one. A man tragically fell on a glass table while in VR, which will hopefully encourage everyone to spend the extra 15 seconds and ensure that play spaces are clear of any obstructions. Seriously, kick that coffee table aside. Or are they covfefe tables now? As if the worry of being trapped in a sea of glass created from the explosion of your furniture piece wasn't enough, HTC seemed to be set out to make sure every piece of furniture you own will be obliterated by your blindfolded buffoonery. As early in the year, we were introduced to the HTC Tracker. These little devices strap onto virtually any object, allowing them to be tracked in 3D space, assuming an appropriate model is created, along with individual game support. And this was exciting! We can finally track our whole body! And now we have plastic guns, and tennis rackets, and baseball bat. Okay, I'm getting a bit of deja vu here. Wait, they cost how much? No, this wasn't the shock we all had almost 2 years ago when the Rift had finalized its shipping price. Each HTC Vive tracker will set you back a whopping $100. So if you're looking to take the immersion factor and introduce your feet to a dino's face, you're going to be looking at $200. If you want to look good while doing it too, then you're expected to cough up $300 for a third tracker to go on your waist to help improve the IK model in supported games.
But wait, order in the next 30 minutes, and you can cut the cord for only 300 United States dollary too.
That's right. Wireless VR is actually a thing. It's here and it works. Well, mostly. The TP Cast is the first commercial VR accessory that cuts your VR umbilical cord and puts it right in your pocket. Also, there's a battery and a router for some reason. The Vive cord bugs me, sure, but it doesn't $300 bug me. But all things considered, the option to stream a 2160 by 1200 signal wirelessly at 90 Hz with no perceivable latency or degradation of signal quality at a range of roughly 6 meters is quite impressive and enticing for those who have the dosh. I certainly thought wireless VR wouldn't become an option until much later in the game, but I'm glad this Chinese company proved me wrong. I just wish they figured out a way to cram the 2.4 GHz router into a little dongle you could plug into your computer. But I guess if that hasn't ever been done before, then it's probably impossible. Speaking of cramming big things into little things, well, not really. I just wanted you all to think that I had a smooth segue. A lot of VR games came out this year. Some of them even had playtimes longer than 2 hours. Serious Sam: The First Encounter was the first, obviously, in a slew of flat-to-VR ports from Croteam. And it was glorious. Sure, the game was first playable in December of 2016, but this sudden entry kicked off Croteam's ambitious undertaking of fusing both flat and VR users together, so each Serious Sam game could be played like the Master Chief Collection. But it actually works this time. No joke, it works really well. But not well enough, apparently. The sales numbers for the VR ports of Serious Sam titles were dwarfed by The Last Hope, Croteam's only built-for-VR title as of yet, and judging by their reaction to these low sales numbers, I'm left questioning what kind of content VR really needs right now. It seems logical for studios to jump into VR by spending less money porting their older games to VR, as that method is surely cheaper and faster than building a new VR game from scratch. But when the game you're releasing is over 10 years old and has surely been played to death by the fans you're trying to sell to, not to mention most of your market is already going to be hesitant to buy the same game again for $40, how much of a market is there really? The Talos Principle has the worst sales numbers out of all 4 of Croteam's ports, but I think that may be better attributed to it being a niche port of a niche genre for a niche device. Regardless, Serious Sam has completely shaken up the VR space, as it has further solidified the idea that traditional FPS games are completely possible to play in VR, an idea that I wasn't completely sold on last year. I still need to be convinced that a 2D FPS reimagined in VR is actually better than a VR game designed from the ground up, though I am seeing a booming interest in playing older games with full VR support and motion-controlled weapons. Late 2016 also brought us the well-received VR mod of 2004's Doom 3, which is free to all owners of the BFG edition. That's an amazing deal, considering each of Croteam's offerings will set you back $40. So why are studios charging so much for their VR ports when the Doom 3 VR mod is free? What a lot of people don't realize is that Doom 3 has the advantage of already having stereoscopic integration, thanks to John Carmack's work back in 2012. The modders who are developing these VR editions have a great framework to build off of, something that's not readily known for new AAA VR games like LA Noire, Fallout 4, and Doom VFR. We simply don't know how much work was needed to blow these flat experiences up to life-size proportions. What we do know is that these titles from Rockstar, Bethesda, and Crow Team have been excellent learning tools if these studios ever decide to return to the VR market, with more ambitious games hosting deeper and more thoughtful VR integration. Unfortunately, these titles can easily be written off as being sandboxy, overpriced tech demos, which they often are, but I'm fully confident that the most recent big studio games are actually a great opportunity for this industry moving forward. Bringing older games to VR means studios don't have to spend millions on voice actors, character artists, level designers, sound designers, narrative designers, or writers, but can instead outsource the engine work to a third-party company, which is exactly what Bethesda did for Fallout and Skyrim. And these outsourced studios most likely have a significantly lower overhead cost than the parent company, meaning the main studio can continue working on the next Elder Scrolls while the outsourced studio dives headfirst into learning VR's best practices. These studios are much more likely to lean to indie games for inspiration, and this is readily apparent when looking at LA Noire's Locomotion choice. I think every solo and small VR team out there should be absolutely ecstatic that the AAA developers are looking inward for ideas, as for years it seems AAA studios have been ignoring the findings and innovations of indies in the 2D space, instead opting to follow the trends of other AAA studios, completely halting any progress and stagnating the market. VR is kind of a breath of fresh air for gaming, comparing it to every major AAA 2D game that comes out feeling like a reskin of the other major AAA 2D games from the year prior. Indie studios are certainly the trailblazers of VR right now, but they undoubtedly can't carry VR on their own. Valve's The Lab is still the best game to show newcomers what VR is like, and it's really neat seeing the success of some mechanics carry over to other titles, like the minigame in The Gallery Part 2, which involves the operation of a device similar to the one found in Slingshot. We've seen a few bullet hells and shmups like Chamber 19 and Zion attempt to carry the Zortex torch, and Quiver appears to be a continuation of the groundwork laid out by Longbow. But that's kind of been it. Surely you can only have so many archery and shmups coexist, right? Well, that doesn't seem to be the case for games like Onward and Pavlov. We're finally to the point where multiple games can have self-sustaining player bases, and I think that's mostly thanks to having enough different VR games out there that there's something for everyone. The top-played VR games are consistently diverse, with a nearly even split between people exploring single-player games, engaging in social shenanigans, participating in tactical firefights, or enjoying utilities that aim to replace their traditional monitors. But I think things could still be better. This steady growth in players means the adopters of headsets are currently happy with the content that's available to them, but the challenge of continuing to entice new users to buy a headset might end up being a different story in the future. I believe the major teachings of The Lab has shown that interaction trumps all. Rec Room, H3 VR, Vanishing Realms, and Space Pirate Trainer are some of the highest rated games on Steam, all taking full advantage of the motion controllers and interactive environments. Yet, I still think there's a lot of room to grow with VR games, mechanically speaking. And the greatest hurdle VR is yet to overcome is having a true killer game. But X is my killer app, you might be saying. I'm not talking about ports or gag games or social gimmicks or monitor replacements, although those have certainly justified the purchasing decisions by many users. I'm talking about the next evolution of something like The Lab, something that's insanely polished, is true perfection on a technical level, interactive in all the right ways, and uses VR to enhance every aspect of the game instead of relying on VR as a crutch to make a bad game good, an honest 10 out of 10. I'm talking about a single VR game that's so good, it has enough weight to make everyone say, man, I really want this one game, and I'll do whatever it takes to be able to afford it, instead of, man, I really like the idea of VR, which is why I bought one, and I'm happy with all these experiences that are available to me. Maybe VR chat is the most recent thing that's keeping people interested in VR, but that interest has to be sustained long enough for users to keep wanting to be a part of it, and I don't think VR chat on its own can maintain that level of interest before fading into obscurity, lost in a sea of other short-lived flavors of the month. Not to mention, VR isn't even a requirement to joining in on the fun. Many are perfectly content with interacting via traditional methods. I may be alone in thinking this, and this is just my opinion, but I truly believe the best chance VR has to silence the criticisms over VR's current content drought is Valve. Maybe I'm overly cynical in thinking that VR even has a content drought right now, as I'm sure many are going to disagree with me. But judging by the most popular and successful content, not a lot of it was made recently. leaving the early adopters like me a little underwhelmed at the recent offerings of VR games. Let me be clear. That's not to say I don't like Fallout 4 or Doom VFR. I absolutely appreciate their scope and enjoy them for what they are, but I'm also not ignoring or disagreeing with the discussions revolving around the disappointments in those games. But at least there is talk about wanting more from a VR game, which means the quality bar has been set by something before, and I think that something is the lab. Nothing gets people talking about Valve more than a confirmation that there are 3 games in development at the studio. And dead memes aside, I'm entirely confident we'll be hearing more of these soon. It's just a shame 2017 wasn't when that happened. Valve is in a wonderful position to create compelling content, as they've had the opportunity to test and iterate their content right alongside the advancements in VR hardware over the last few years. Not to mention they have serious incentive to create content for their platform if they want Steam to stay relevant as VR continues to grow. History has shown that they take threats to Steam very seriously. Hell, we wouldn't have even had a Vive if Oculus didn't part ways to create their own storefront in partnership with Facebook. Valve also knows that VR won't be a success if we keep relying on existing 2D content that gets brought into the VR space.
VR is not going to be a success at all if people just are taking existing content and putting it into a VR space.
This is absolutely what we've seen with Serious Sam, Talos Principle, LA Noire, and yes, even Fallout 4 VR. Despite Fallout boasting the highest sales numbers between the 4 games, but significantly lower than the likes of Space Pirate Trainer and Arizona Sunshine. VR will sell itself when big developers learn to take full advantage of the unique characteristics of VR and utilize those properties in a way that are simply not possible with a keyboard and mouse. This was the state of VR in 2016, and we saw those results in 2017. A series of ports, experiments, and trials from developers, both large and small, all testing the water and finding out what was possible in this space. 2017 has brought developers back to release new games, sharing the findings of their earlier experiments, like the best shotgun model we've seen in Duck Season, or the sprint mechanic in Sprint Vector, which likely stemmed from Servios' movement experiments in raw data. We're going to see more and more innovations from these studios, as well as introductory games from new studios in 2018, alongside hardware iterations from Valve, HTC, LG, and others that begin to enter the VR arena. We'll soon be seeing many more teachings from Valve, as they finally appear confident enough in their findings to continue developing games on a larger scale, instead of blindly throwing a bunch of small darts at a wall and seeing if any of them stick.
There'll be really clear design choices that we're making in each of these games. They're very different. And from each other. In each, a game developer will be able to look at those and say, that was great, that was not as great, which is part of, from our point of view, that's a useful characteristic of these 3.
CES 2018 is right around the corner, and we'll be getting a lot of juicy VR news that will help us predict what the future of VR will hold. Though, right now I'm worried about the recent announcements that are pushing for self-contained VR packages that are preemptively trying to solve an appearance problem rather than solving the GPU constraints, CPU constraints, and content constraints on the high end. I don't believe the price of VR is the problem VR faces right now, although that can help the adoption rate temporarily. Despite the number of users on mobile VR systems due to the low cost of entry, mobile VR lacks an embarrassing amount of content, which fails to motivate people from using the devices as anything more than a cheap party trick. Sure, desktop VR still faces the same challenges, but the right steps are being made to keep things moving. And I'm happy Valve is heavily pushing forward in that direction, because we certainly need more to look forward to in 2018.